Why the U.S. is rejoining UNESCO. Best known as a creator and protector of World Heritage Sites, has the UN's Education, Science and Culture Organization become a political tool among major powers vying for influence? At a cost of over $600 million in back fees, why does Washington want back in now? I'm Andrea Sanke, and today's newsmaker is UNESCO. Well, UNESCO has a fairly prominent place on the global stage. It's best known for its list of heritage sites around the world, as well as its work in preserving culture. But behind the scenes, there is a complex dynamic of international politics at play. Accusations of bias and favoritism have long been an issue within the organization, so much so that the U.S. withdrew twice after it helped create the body in 1945. Here's a look at what drove the U.S. to leave and, more importantly, what's brought it back.
History of mankind. They do hereby create the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization.
That was the birth of UNESCO, whose aim is to contribute to peace and security by promoting collaboration among the nations through education, science and culture. The agency advances literacy, works on access to clean water and ocean protection, and sets the standards on the ethics of artificial intelligence. These aren't easy topics to navigate, and have seen the organization caught in a global power struggle. The United States' ups and downs with UNESCO are one good example of that. In 1984, the Reagan administration accused the body of being extraneously politicized and left the organization. Washington believed UNESCO had become a poorly managed Soviet propaganda platform with anti-US bias. But almost 2 decades later, then-President George W. Bush made a surprise announcement.
It's a symbol of our commitment to human dignity. The United States will return to UNESCO.
Yet the decision was also considered a move to garner international support for his so-called global war on terror. But in 2011, Palestine's admission to UNESCO changed that yet again.
To admit Palestine as a member is regrettable, premature, and undermines our shared goal of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East.
The body's approach towards ally Israel eventually led to the second US exit in 2017. But earlier this month, the State Department informed the organization that it's planning to return. The US has also agreed to pay it $600 million in back payments. UNESCO hailed the decision and said it is the outcome of years of work.
UNESCO is now stronger, firstly because it showed it was capable of generating consensus even on the most sensitive issues. It is obviously the case with regards to decisions taken about the Middle East and adopted over the past 6 years with consensus.
Yet this time, it's believed a whole new agenda prompted the US bid to rejoin.
If we're really serious about the digital age competition with China, from my perspective, in a clear-eyed set of interests, we can't afford to be absent any longer from one of the key fora in which standards around education for science and technology are set.
As efforts to regulate AI ramp up, the US wants a seat at the table with UNESCO. Its absence has helped China expand its geocultural influence through the organization's heritage lists. And China's impact is partly about money. Beijing replaced the US as the largest financial contributor.
If the US side is sincere in rejoining this time, it should show its sincerity in abiding by international rules and respecting the international rule of law and effectively fulfilling its international obligations as a responsible country.
As the rivalry between the two world powers seems to grow, UNESCO isn't immune, and the US's return might open up yet another chapter in the organization's controversial history.
Well, joining me now to debate why UNESCO has found itself at the center of so much controversy and why the U.S. is rejoining now are From Washington, Jeffrey Stacey. He is a former U.S. State Department official in the Obama administration and the author of Integrating Europe. From Beijing, Einar Tangen is a political and economic affairs analyst. And from Turin, Italy, Anna Summers-Cox. She's the founder of the Art newspaper. Thanks so much for being with us. Anna, I'll start with you. UNESCO is the one organization that many think should just not be political at all. It's about arts, it's about culture, it's about even archaeology. Yet here we are. Should it be this controversial, or has it been hijacked, really, by political interests?
Well, I think it's a myth to think that culture is neutral. Everything is actually political. But I think what has happened in UNESCO is that instead of being an assemblage of intellectuals and well-minded people, which is what it started off as being, something that was supposed to help us all live better, the ideals of the post-war period, it has now become a place which is full of representatives of the national governments. As a consequence, it has become very politicized, even when it's taking apparently simple decisions, such as, should Venice be on the World Heritage Risk List? Well, of course it should. The water level is rising. Venice will disappear by the year 2000 if nothing is 2100 if nothing's done. But because of political pressure, this doesn't happen, and this gets repeated again and again and again.
Right. You even noted, I know, that a few years ago when you used to go to the meetings, that you used to see archaeologists and researchers at all the meetings. Those were the more dominant input. Let's put it that way. Now it's mostly, the ambassadors and more of the kind of political influence, rather, at these meetings instead. Could be a bit unfortunate. But then quickly tell me what you make of the U.S. rejoining now. Even if it's a good thing to have a founding member back as well as a massive donor, is it disappointing to know that the reason they're coming back is more about vying for power and influence against China?
I don't think, well, that is, of course, a big part of it, but I think it should never have withdrawn in the first place. It's not the first time they've withdrawn. They withdrew in 1984, by the way, when they thought UNESCO was being badly run. The trouble about the United States is it does think it's a world on its own, and that it doesn't really need the rest of the world. And UNESCO, it's never liked any of the supranational organizations. So if they think that's not being well run, or if it does something they don't like, they say, well, we'll just walk away. However, it's not just the budget, which is quite considerable. I mean, it used to be the biggest donor to UNESCO, but it actually is an important voice of the West. And without that, we are much weakened in discussions. And China is a very important voice in the East. So we need to have something like a balance of power. I think that's what they would have said in the 19th century, when politics was all about balances of power. And so I'm glad that it is back, and it's not against China. It is more that let's get back to, all voices being slightly more equal.
Okay, Jeffrey, what do you make of that? I mean, has the U.S. been a bit, can I use the word arrogant in its decision-making to just join and rejoin when they think they're getting their way or when they don't? And also, I have to ask you, do you think it's worth, at this point, these $600 million or so in back fees?
Sure it is. And really, over time, it's not a U.S. arrogance that we're talking about here. We're talking about a couple of occasions in quite recent history where right-wing governments, the Trump presidency, the Reagan presidency, for very specific reasons and accusations of anti-Israeli bias and things, and really the controversy of Trump's son-in-law, accounted for those two aberrations. So we're really getting back to sort of the founding ideals, as my colleague just referred to. And let's talk about this as a balance of culture instead of a balance of power. What we need to be doing is getting back to UNESCO's founding principles on the one hand and its important programs on the other, putting politics aside where we can. And really, this is about the Biden administration and my good colleagues there that I used to work with in the State Department and what have you, getting back to, in all kinds of senses, where the United States should be. It should be a humble power, a member with respect to all other members, And I think that's what the Biden team is, in essence, attempting to do. And there's quite a good U.S. team there with our current UN ambassador. And so, really, this is the U.S. rejoining the family where it should have been all along. And there's nothing
Yes.
about dominating or what have you.
Einar, you don't look convinced, and China.
Well,
Okay,
it's
go
not
ahead.
whether I'm convinced. I mean, what Jeffrey is proposing is utter tosh. The Undersecretary of State, John Bass, said in March that the U.S. absence from UNESCO had strengthened China and, quote, undercuts our ability to be as effective in promoting our vision of a free world, end quote. He said, UNESCO was key in setting and shaping standards for technology and science, teaching around the world. So, quote, so if we're really serious about the digital age competition with China, we can't afford to be absent any longer, end quote. That has nothing to do with the lofty ideas. And quite frankly, the US has not been a family member of the UN. It has scoffed at it. It did not join UN Convention on Laws of the Sea, which it says that it has the right to enforce. It does not accept the ICC. It's the last holdout on the convention to protect women and children. I mean, I don't know how much more you can say about it. This is purely political. The US is saying we have to get in there because we're afraid that China will set standards and the rest of the world will follow, and we will not be able to impose our view on the rest of the world.
Right. I mean, Jeffrey, we have to be honest. The U.S. has, at least in this instance, been pretty straightforward about it, feeling somewhat threatened by China's influence at the UNESCO organization.
As I spoke about, there needs to be a balance of power, to use one of my colleagues' terms, but really a balance of culture and values and what have you. And you spoke of them as our host, that you need East and West. And if you have that sort of balance, there'll be an attempt to get there despite the anti-Americanism of one of my colleagues here. Let's move forward and get back to what really this valuable organization has been doing and should continue to do.
Okay, Einar, I will come back to you in a second, but
Jeffrey, yeah, let us put it
quickly,
this
Einar.
way. I am an American, okay? I was a politician, a lawyer, investment banker. I started businesses long before you were doing much of what you're doing. So this idea that I'm un-American because I point out our shortcomings is the whole point. That's why I'm an American. I can do that. And your attempts to cover this up with a personal attack shows clearly you do not have the arguments to put forth as to why the U.S. is doing this. Why has there been no discussion about cultural heritage, about the work that the UNESCO does in terms of mobilizing philosophers, artists, the UN Universal Copyright Convention, Man in the Biosphere, cultural heritage? No. There's nothing about that. It's just about the race for technical.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'd like to get Anna back into the discussion. Anna, go ahead. Your observations of the exchange you just heard. I mean, is it relevant?
Yeah, of course it's relevant, because despite all its failings, the word UNESCO attached to a project enjoys international prestige, and the general public is impressed, and other politicians are impressed in countries and so on. It's a seal of approval. Therefore, it is right that a wide range of people should be involved in the question of giving the seal of approval. Now, China has big projects in education in Africa at the moment, which is doing through UNESCO and also the Silk Road. So that's fine, but you know what America should also be represented in doing whatever it is it's doing. I mean, it should have some voice in what that little label gets attached to. When it comes to the Heritage Committee has become a complete farce. And the last meeting in 2021, which was chaired out of Fuzhou, with very large funding, $795,000, a lot of money for a poor organization. Nobody was allowed to speak or cause debate to take place, except for an Ethiopian delegate, which was obviously the choice of the people who were running the meeting, which was the Chinese. Now, this isn't right. There should be free debate. And quite honestly, we have a greater tradition of free debate in the West and America than in China. And that for that reason, I'm glad that America is rejoining, because I think it's going to give courage to those of us in the West who believe that we have certain values we want to defend.
Okay, Anna, quickly, I need to just change tact for a minute because there's another issue at play that's also very important. Is this move by the United States actual recognition that Palestinians deserve a place at the table as well? And moving forward, do you think Israel might accept that too and also rejoin?
I doubt it very much, to both questions.
Really, you don't think this is recognition? Let me ask Jeffrey then. Is this recognition from the United States that Palestinians deserve to be part of UNESCO?
On some level, it is. And at the same time, you know, there is just under the Netanyahu government, sadly, there are all sorts of internal problems in Israel with its current extreme right government that probably make that unlikely. That doesn't mean that the U.S. is doing anything other than seeking a balance when it comes to Palestinian-Israeli issues. And really, this should be put to the side, as my colleague is getting to. We should get back to valuing cultural heritage and looking at cultural diversity, and all of these wonderful programs related to press freedom and all kinds of things are really what's important here. And if we can manage to push geopolitics to the side, well, that is a noble endeavor. It may not always be reality, and one of my colleagues here can't seem to get away from that topic, but that needs to be where things are headed. That is what the Biden administration has in mind. And let's give it a shot and see where we can get to in terms of the developing agenda over the next few years.
Okay, Einar, I know you think that's farcical, but you know, China has also said it hopes that the U.S. is now serious about multilateralism. Do you think it is?
No. American exceptionalism is still there. There's still true believers, the Biden administration, et cetera. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the U.S. should be. It should never have left UNESCO. The goals are there. My issue is don't politicize. Yes, give me a break from you. In any event, the whole issue here is that you do have to have, it is a multilateral world. And in essence, the U.S. is recognizing it by rejoining. They're not trying to dictate. They're saying, look, we want to be at the table and we want to be there. And I think that's good. And I agree. Anna, sometimes I do believe the Chinese are too thin-skinned about things. They're afraid of any kind of criticism. And as a world power, that is going to have to adjust because people are going to criticize. There are different values in the world. And I think organizations like this are a very good point for people to get to know each other's views and values without debate, without coming together, without bringing your intellectuals and scientists together and trying to achieve something. Then you just create silos, the kind of situation that we actually have right now.
Okay, Anna, let me come back to you and tell us what you think UNESCO's real priorities are today. We've heard a lot of talk about how they are shaping the teaching of science and technology, specifically in the AI space. What does that mean?
I haven't the faintest idea. I'm afraid I'm not sufficiently inside to know whether they are doing a better job of it than all the other organizations that are currently looking into it and making alarmist remarks. I think that quite a lot, unfortunately, I really do believe that UNESCO has been much hollowed out in the last not so few years, and it's had to made public statements which it really can't live up to. I mean, for example, over the looting out of Syria and so on, it came up with wonderfully alarmist statements, none of which turned out to be basically true, but it made them sound important and busy. And UNESCO is too important to be pretending to be busy. It has to be really busy, and it ought to listen to its advisory bodies, ICOMOS, the International Council on Museums and Sites, and ICROM, I tell you what that is too, the International Centre for the Study of the Preservation and Reformation of Cultural Property. Both of these made up of extremely competent scientists and experts who tell them what should be happening in the case of sites, which then gets completely ignored when it comes to the political meetings.
And then, Jeffrey, there is another concern going forward. I mean, whether or not this is a long-term decision or will Republicans reverse it? Should Trump win the presidency in 2024, or any other Republican for that matter?
Well, he'll likely be doing that from a jail cell. But if he's convicted under the Espionage Act, he can't even run for political office. So we should really look past this.
But we have to be realistic. Never underestimate that man.
Being realistic, he's one step away from a jail cell, and he will be completely illegitimized in the political space over time, even though there's a core 30% of Americans who still support him. That's not unlike the polarization almost anywhere in the world we look
What about
today.
another Republican leader then?
Well, probably not. If you look at even the most recent entrant in the race, Clay Hurd, and a number of others, I don't think that's likely. There are other priorities, and whether or not we see Republicans in power in the near future, it's the longer that we move toward a less polarized world, that decreases the chances of that sort of thing happening. And the norm, this is a reversion to norm. And the norm is for the US to be part of the entire UN system, a contributor to it with its fellow members. And that's what we should be focused on, as opposed to getting excessively worried about the latest shift in geopolitics. And the US and China, for example, with my friend Tony Blinken's visit there, was actually a successful visit. We're likely to see Xi and Biden meet on the sidelines of the APEC summit in San Francisco in the fall. So let's give peace a chance, shall we, really? And if we can just manage to get past the war in Ukraine, if things are successful there, that will be a giant step in the right direction in terms of decreasing polarization in the world. And this overall reversion to norm is something that we should all embrace.
Okay, so Einar, then, okay, politics aside, if that's possible to put them aside, I had asked Anna about, what UNESCO says its priorities are and the fact that it's shaping the teaching of science and technology. But in the AI space, that can get very complicated and controversial, especially between countries like the United States and China that are going to be vying for leadership in that, specifically that realm of technology. So where do you see that going?
This is a red herring. No one is going to adopt all the things. So these are merely going to be suggestions and debates. All right. The UNESCO has no right or power to impose what it does. It is up to the countries. If they can come together and agree, fine. But if they can't, which in this case they probably won't, there's nothing there. It's just going to be a debate itself. If one side says, oh, it's not to our advantage to ratify this, they won't. Now, I do have to speak to Jeffrey's things. I object to this idea that the U.S. is just trying to reset norms, and this is what the Biden administration has done. The day after Blinken is trying to lower the temperature, the U.S. president calls Xi Jinping a dictator, and same day they're sailing warships up and down the Taiwan Straits. That's hardly consistent. Your actions and your words have to match. And that's true for China as well. You have to lead by example.
But let's stick to the UNESCO debate for now.
Yeah, in terms of UNESCO, though, it does this issue about how much power does it have? I think with the $600 million that the U.S. owes, UNESCO and is now going to pay as a membership fee, hopefully they'll have the means to not only engage in this debate, but also kind of follow the original intent of this, which is trying to make the world a better place. We have huge issues on our hands. As Anna pointed out, Venice is going to disappear. We have rising water levels. Isn't it about time we start concentrating on that?
Indeed.
What do you think I'm at, Mr. Kuhn?
Let me get a final word from Anna, though. I mean, Anna, if you had the proverbial magic wand, if you could take control of UNESCO as an organization, what would you do?
Well, my particular thing is obviously cultural heritage, and there are a great number of sites around the Mediterranean that are going to be underwater by the end of the century, and I cannot see plans in those various countries to do anything about it. And if I were the head of UNESCO, God help me, I would actually organize a meeting of the heads of those states, just to have the facts presented to them by scientists and say, look, we will help you, but get some plan going. We need planning now, long-term planning.
Do you think the U.S. will push for those kinds of objectives, or do you hope?
On that front, there's great work happening in the United States, but very much on the local level. I mean, really good, state level and sometimes even smaller. Okay. As yet, there isn't a great big federal plan.
Okay. Anna, that will have to be the final word because we are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.